Welcome to another episode of Women in Family Business. We are WIFB, the global initiative for women to share their stories and expertise on matters related to the family enterprise. How do you keep a 170-year-old family business connected when it spans continents and includes more than 420 family members? For Laura Meyer Ahlström, Family Functions Manager of Finland's Ahlström Corporation, the answer lies in storytelling. From childhood discoveries in her family's ancestral home to building multilingual narratives that bridge generations, Laura has made it her mission to foster cohesion through heritage and creativity. In this episode, we sat down with Laura, who shares how she blends the history with innovation to unite her globally dispersed family, and why in her family, passion always takes precedence over obligation. Enjoy this episode with Laura. Do you remember when in your life and in your childhood you started realizing that you were part of this kind of like a legacy? Do you remember there was a moment where that realization hit, or was it like sort of always part of your consciousness?
I think maybe it was a little bit part of my consciousness, but I would say it's much later on. I'd say early kind of 20s before I started realizing actually what the vast legacy of the family and the business. I think before that, my connection was more to the family and family members. My cousins, our heritage home up in Norrmark. So it was more kind of that connectional feeling rather than that, there's a business. And I think our business was at that time, it's been kind of split and merged and stuff like that. So it was hard to kind of find that real connection to which business I was connected to. It was kind of more that connection to the legacy and the history of our family and family members. And thankful we have our heritage home is set up in Norrmark, about 3 hours northwest from Helsinki. So there are a lot of in those homes. They're very well preserved, and there's a lot of pictures from all different family members. So going up there is kind of an easy way to kind of connect and kind of that window
Okay.
into that history. And I think being there with my cousin, my parents, you kind of build up your own relationship to the place and kind of your own connection, but also at the same time being able to connect to, oh wait, that's my great great grandfather, or and that was there, and he built this house, or that picture was there. So it's all these small artifacts to the pictures that kind of help you kind of connect to, kind of put the puzzle together.
Mhm.
And then maybe later on, now when I started working actually in the family company, I've really first now really seen the huge history that there actually is.
The sheer number of family members is actually also a little bit of the reason why your work came about, because today you are the family functions manager, and I do love that title. It's very interesting because that job is like obviously something that only family businesses can really relate to. So tell us a little bit more about like how your career evolved into this, because I also know that you had to adapt to the needs of the family along the way, and sort of this job description that you have today is sort of like a bit of a something that evolved over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I joined our at that time it was a separate company, our kind of holding company. I joined there after finishing university as more like of a part-time assistant. So that's the kind of first step into there where I got to kind of see what, organizing all these events and what it required to actually communicate to the whole family and what it meant for us to kind of own together the company, be shareholders together and stuff like that. So that was my kind of first window. Then a few years later, after working elsewhere, I came back, and at that time more as kind of administration manager, kind of very back office end, which was also at that time our kind of communication was still not very digital. So we sent out a lot of mails and just by post had to send out all the invitations, all the business
Yeah.
communication, everything like
Yeah.
that. So it was very kind of admin back office. But then at that time I got to be a part of kind of seeing, okay, we need to evolve and kind of what's our next step to kind of keep
Mhm.
this family together and how do we digitalize and stuff like that. So that was fun to kind of start seeing that, there's actually need for a strategy to kind of keep this together and communicates. And I think a lot of people before me already realized that, we're so big, and if we want to have that connection and engagement actually requires intention. Like it just doesn't
Mhm.
happen by itself.
Mhm.
It's something that's needed. So we were fortunate enough that we had actually looked at a digital platform already before COVID hits. So I went on maternity leave, but at that time we had already set up our digital platform, which was already a huge big next step for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of kept us still together during that time when we could see each other face to face, events. And we were already at that time, we're almost 30% live abroad. And we don't really even have a common language. So there's Finnish, Swedish, English, French, German. So, but at that time, we also had to start realizing, okay, we cannot be sending out information in three languages and still having to adapt. So it has been a role, and I mean, I'm not alone here. I've had colleagues who helped me with this. So we're now two people in family functions, but we used to be three working up and at the holding company. So we kind of had to find our way. And it's always, I think, with these jobs, a little bit of a, test and see if it works. If not, then adapt and change, strategy a little bit. So we know where we want to go and we want to kind of keep the family together. We want to have communication and it is kind of adapting and finding new ways, especially now again. Now after a merger, we again had to kind of find a new way of how are we doing now things. Like how many events can we have? What are like the social events? What are the business events? What are the different forms where we can have not only the same generation discuss and meet up, but also like the different generations? How can we have the next gens with the older gens?
And how many family members are we talking about now?
Well, we say about 420 plus. So give or take.
The level of storytelling you're bringing to your family today is extensive. Why you think that kind of storytelling really helps with conveying things like values, with maybe aligning everyone behind, a unified identity, and why do you think that works across generations?
We're very fortunate because we have kind of two things. We have a huge historical archive dating back to 1915, if I remember correctly. And we even have the first kind of letters from 1850 from our founding father. So we have a huge archive, both the industrial side and the family archive there. So there it's really easy to kind of go and deep dive and see these different letters and understand what actually has been going on. Not only that, very business kind of history, but actually the huge history of both the place up in Norrmark and everything that's been going on there. And then secondly, we had a big identity project actually a few years back where we kind of, after I said all the, mergers and splits and of the company, people had a hard time on knowing, what story am I connecting to? What is actually our values and where are we? And for somebody, if you said Ahlström, it was the industrial heritage, or for somebody, it was, our place up in Norrmark, for other people, it was here in Helsinki, in Espanja. So there was kind of like very divided on what was our story, what was our like narrative, what did we want? And I think that identity project was a huge value because that actually then we made an identity booklet even from that, which was kind of, we looked at all the stakeholders, different family members, both external and internal people. So telling, different aspects of what the company Ahlström is and the family Ahlström is and what our values are. And I think that was a huge asset for us because that kind of for the first time gave us, okay, now we have that one story and one joint narrative that we want to have. So and for at least for the last few years, it's really been easy to kind of communicate that. So we just repeat that story because we realized actually from that huge project that we actually did have a joint story. It was just never like properly written down in the right words and kind of what exactly we wanted to express.
Tell us a little bit more about like how you perceive the different generations. Do you feel like, in your work and what you're doing, is there truly such a big difference between like sort of like, your Gen Zs, your millennials, your Gen Xers, etc., and older? Or do you feel that ultimately there's a unifier here?
I would say ultimately there is a unifier. At least in our family, I think there's a lot of respect towards the different generations, at least from what I've experienced. Of course, there's nuanced differences. I mean, the type of content and what type of information they want and, how they want to engage with the family and the company are maybe vary a little bit between the generations. But I would say that, I mean, I think there's also a huge kind of mentorship in our family, and I feel like there is a very good connection. I can ask older generations, and they've been amazing at helping and guiding me. So, of course, there's always that, succession. There's always a little bit of, what's happened in the past, and these transitions are never 100% smooth. But I think we're in a very good position right now where I feel like there's not. And I think, we're very well prepared for arguments or conflicts, but thankfully, you don't really need to use that. We've been quite good at communicating openly and discussing and having those cross-generational events and meeting points and discussions where we kind of engage all the different generations.
How do you see the importance of being the first one having that title? And how do you see a responsibility in relation to succession towards, like, what you're doing, et cetera, and, like, sort of expanding that function? Because it's clearly the more people are in the family, the more key dysfunction becomes, right?
I'm not really worried actually in operational positions. So I think every time a family member is actively involved in the business, it's kind of they have to find their own path. It's very clear and simple what to do in it.
Mhm.
And I mean, I don't feel like I do this job alone. I do have a colleague who helps me out. Or she's actually the director, so she's external, but she's not a family member. But
Mm.
she's a huge asset to this as well. And at the same time, we also have our supervisory board chair is very actively also hands-on involved with this. So I feel like I get a huge support. It doesn't feel lonely doing this job. I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of people who want to see this kind of our family kind of continue to own together and see me succeed. Because I mean, my win is everybody's win because that means we're doing something for the family. I feel like a lot of the time like a ghost writer because I don't do it under my own name or profile. It's kind
Mhm.
of like family functions or the Ahlström family or we're doing things.
I think it's so important to have that single narrative for the family and the family unity, and everyone can get behind it. But in a world that's changing very rapidly, how do we make sure that the single narrative doesn't make us close minded? How do we make sure that we get enough external input as an enterprising family that we shift and we move in time with the times?
I think my role is biggest, I'd say now more than ever, we need a kind of value-based leadership
Mm.
and kind of strengthening those values and kind of repeating what our values are to the family because I think that's what we really need right now in these turbulent times. I'm not worried about the business per se. I think as you said, we've adapted and changed over the years, and this is not our first kind of turbulent time. So, and that way, I think we'll be able to adapt again and find a new kind of that business part. Will be able to pivot, but that being said, I hope our values and our kind of core remains constant. And I think
Mhm.
that's where my job comes in to kind of repeat those values and make sure that those values are incorporated not only in our family members, but also within the business.
How do you deal with potential issues that individual family members face, like, reputationally or something like that? Are you guys very preventive about this as a family? Are you trying to, like, sort of like help or safeguard certain things? Do you give guidelines? Like, what is that like?
I think that's something we haven't particularly written down yet, which is a
Mhm.
good thing. And I think that's something that needs to be developed. At the same time, I think we also kind of trust in our family members to make the
Mhm.
right decisions. And hopefully, they've already from an early childhood kind of embedded in them to be like a good human being and, do the right thing. But of course, as you said, people are, make mistakes and that's fine. I think one thing is, we don't really have in that way if you're thinking like a PR strategy of how to do that. No, not really. But again, I think they have to stand for their own mistakes. And of course, if something were to happen now, say more in the board of directors or
Yeah.
operationally
Yeah.
wise,
Yeah.
that's a different
Mm.
issue. But I mean, if somebody, a cousin, distant cousin or something does something, it's still not completely interacting with the brand of the company, which is like
Mm.
a biggest issue.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about, like, what lies ahead now for you? I know that you guys have just, like, done, as you said, like, you've done a few films, you've created websites with the stories, you have an intranet. Like, what big sort of like strategies are on the horizon for you? Like, what are you looking forward to in the next sort of like 5 years in terms of what you're going to do for the family? What's the next level you want to take this to?
I hope at least because I said we have our family archive there, and I think there's still a lot of untold stories that I
Hmm.
kind of and story that our archive has kind of been like that museum where where everything is kind of
Yeah.
gathering dust and kind of bringing those stories to life in a new way. So I really hope to see more kind of digital content creation. So I really the movies that we've been doing are great. I think they're a really good way kind of telling the story kind of in a concise way and kind of rattling them into different occasions. As we have that book from the second generation, and now there's a book coming about the third generation
Wow.
about the cousins of the third generation. So that's going to be launched hopefully soon. And I think just finding again, I think for the future, it's not only that digital content creation, but also kind of finding new ways of bringing light to these old stories and kind of find those small stories also, not that big, historical timeline, but that small niche story, but that can be fun and kind of not only tell the story, but kind of connect it to today and what's going on now. Because I think that's what the next gens are really good at doing. They kind of, if you're looking at the older generation, as I said earlier, they're great at, telling those untold stories and having their own small anecdotes. I think then the next gens are great at kind of connecting that historical story to today and kind of bringing out that, essence of what that story meant and what it means today and how you kind of connect it to your own children or to yourself and what's going on today. So I think I love that, how they always manage to do that. So I think kind of interacting more with the next gens also and seeing if they can, how they see these stories and kind of how can you connect this further to the business or family members or stuff like that. Otherwise, I think we're going to continue doing a little bit what we've been doing already, kind of having our certain events, our inter-channel, hopefully also kind of expanding on that. That's what I love about my work. There is no clear strategy of what's next to come. It's kind of, we have to
adapting to the needs
adapting to the needs and adapting to the times.